Hi there, come on in. In the next few minutes, you're going to learn how to say come on in to a deer. Here's a buck responding to a grunt call, and it'll stop him. Grunt tubes have been big sellers to hunters, and they work, but Bob Maguire is a master at calling deer with his mouth. He's going to teach us how. We'll also have a report on the UP duck opener on Drummond Island and around the state, some comments by a lady duck hunter, an award-winning goose recipe, and a lot more. So you stay tuned. I'm Fred Trost. It's Thursday night, time for Michigan Outdoors. Fawn vocalizations. How important are they to deer calling?
The best, well, actually, the best long-range vocalizations and the best coaxers, right up close range, both happen to be different types of maternal neonatal doe-fawn communications. The fawn distress ball that especially a young deer would give, traumatized deer, caught in a fence perhaps, many deer sound alike, many mammals sound alike. The fawn distress ball is perhaps the best general purpose long-range deer call that I know.
How do you do that? What are you doing with your hands on your nose?
Just tonal inflections, resonance.
Like with your nose, like that?
Yeah, and it also is a place to anchor. I'm basically making a more nasal vocalization.
Okay.
Okay. And then controlling the inflections.
Bob Maguire makes it sound easy, and it really is. Some people can do this inhaling, but I found I had to exhale to make a decent fawn call. Yeah, I'm just kind of whining here.
Yes, you are. That's a bleat. Although a lot of people think of it as a bleat. That's an older deer bleat that I just did. A whitetail young fawn bleat, it's just a mewing sound. And it's a low level of insistence. If it's a sound that a fawn might get if it wakes up, rises, looks around, hey Ma, where are you? If then the...
How does that sound? I mean,
that sounds good, it does.
I mean, it would work maybe?
Oh yeah. That, absolutely. You're exhaling?
No, I could try it inhaling.
No, you were exhaling?
I choke.
Well, yeah, it's a different technique entirely.
Yeah, I can't do that one.
If you want to do a slightly more insistent call, the vocalization is called a mew, and it's as if a fawn arises and then looks around and says, "Where are you? Damn it," or something more emphatic. And the difference in the sound is a raised inflection on the tail end of the same mewing type vocalization. The mewing that you're doing before is real good.
Not real good.
Not real good?
No, it is. It sounds good. That's a good vocalization. You can coax deer in. And I have had occasion, one time at the Game Tracker 10s or Better camp, I had a young man in a tree stand above me who had never harvested a whitetail before with a bow. And a deer came in to the... immediately got to within 30 yards and started closing. The angle then was changing between the bow hunter and the caller, me, the caller on the ground, and this nervous bow hunter up in the tree stand initially thinking, oh, when the deer is broadside, he can drill it. And then, well, you know, first-time bow hunters, myself included, many things happen, and they all seem to. Eventually, the deer got into position to where I was almost lined up with the arrow. And I was really concerned, so I changed the vocalization somewhat. That really happened.
Shoot the
deer? Yes, please shoot the deer.
How did that affect the deer?
It didn't. The general vocalization was the same, actually.
So
I think you can actually say words inside vocalizations and get by with it. You don't have to come close. You have to have a general rhythm and a general sound, but all deer sound alike. And the notion that the older bucks, for instance, would have a deeper grunt is not true. Some of the oldest, largest bucks that I've filmed and recorded the vocalizations have tending grunts similar to an antelope, a high creaky grunt.
Now that isn't very loud.
No, it isn't. It's difficult to carry. Some of the manufactured calls carry better, but what I like to do if I'm calling a buck and I can see him and know that he's alone, or else if I can't see, unless I know that the buck is in the presence of other deer, I do soft calling. And then progressively, these short calls, maybe 2 or 3 tending grunts, I make them louder until I believe that the animal heard me. Then I shut up. If 2 deer encounter each other and one wishes to displace the other deer, perhaps at a favorite food time. Well, no, initially the low level. The high level, yes, is the only time that I've ever witnessed it other than of caged deer directing the grunt sniff wheeze toward a human. That doesn't count. Whenever it's been a deer-deer communication, it's been just prior to fight, and I've only witnessed bucks giving the vocalization.
So this is something they would use, like, get out of the way, move back.
No,
like that? No?
Those are the low levels.
Oh.
The get out of the way might be a head threat accompanied with a single low grunt. Sounds like a maternal grunt, or they call it a low grunt. That's a displacement type, low level of agonistic vocalization. If the subordinate does not move and it escalates, perhaps with an associated foreleg kick, it's called a grunt sniff. It's a grunt, the same low grunt, followed, yeah. And then normally the highest level agonistic vocalization is those, it combines the grunt with a sniff snort followed by a prolonged wheeze. And I don't normally hear it building up all the way to a class 3 agonistic encounter. Normally if they meet each other, it's suddenly both bucks believe themselves dominant and are both willing to kill or be killed. It's a highest level of aggression. And again, I make the sound by placing my lower teeth against the upper jaw, and you spray a little spit. You exhale it.
Now that will, how is that useful to a hunter? How would you ever use that?
When you're going for broke. If you're in an area that suddenly picks up scraping activity, there's a good chance, the intense scraping indicates that there's probably a doe about to come into heat in that area, and unless he's already picked up that doe, the buck seems to favor it, may in fact tolerate your presence climbing the tree stand. You may not know that a buck's been there, well aware of your presence. And there have been occasions that I believe a buck has been hidden nearby, or perhaps we know he has, and hours after we have arrived, perhaps we're getting ready to go, perhaps the light's finally right, we give that grunt sniff wheeze, and it's a going for broke vocalization.
So that buck may come right in then.
It'll be immediate, the response, I guarantee you. You'll flush every deer out of the woods but one. And that one buck, right. Lester, yeah.
What about the, you've talked about this 5-minute rule, which hit home with me. The 5-minute rule being, if you say, I'm going to stop hunting at 10 o'clock, when it gets to be 11 o'clock, you say 5 more minutes. And then you crawl down from the tree stand, leave your blind, and right away you spook that deer that you've been waiting for.
The one you meet him head on.
So what should you do before leaving the blind?
I like to give the contact call. It's a vocalization that whitetail use to maintain a mutual awareness of each other's location. A lot of times they form friendships and they follow along together, they'll feed together. If one feeds away, the one that's left behind might raise its head and say, "Where are you?" I teach people reassure. You kind of make a variation of that sound.
Like something like that?
That's good. That's good.
That'll work.
And if you give that from your tree stand, it's not a continuous dialogue that might be established. It's a single response. And I've had hunters following the show. When I come back the next year, they'll come up to me and tell me their experiences where they finally decided to try it where it counted. A lot of people are afraid to use vocalizations at a good hunting spot.
You feel kind of funny.
Yeah.
But if you give that reassure type of thing, and you might get a response.
Yeah, you might get a response. And if you don't, what have you lost?
Yeah.
You're about to get out anyhow.
Yeah.
And especially the instance that I gave before, when a buck suddenly intensely scrapes in your area and you're hunting that area, give the grunt sniff wheeze. Go for broke. You're about to leave the stand anyhow. You're going to spook the deer off. Give the grunt sniff wheeze, and you might just attract that deer. Either way, you'll know quickly whether you should get out of your tree.
If you're still skeptical that deer calling works, there were 44 hunters who bagged trophy bucks for our hunting awards program last year, and they said they were calling or rattling them in. Here's some of them. His first with a bow, Sean Brown from Gobles called it this 8-point inn in Van Buren County. And here's a 9-point that came to the call of Jeff Nair from Mount Pleasant, hunting Isabella County on November 5th. Greg Reed from Hemlock arrowed this 10-point that answered his call in Midland County. This Jackson County 10-point was called into a tree stand by Jim Plum from Spring Arbor. Bill Smith from Midland grunted in his 9-point on November 3rd. And look at this 11-point with a 12.5-inch tine called in Washtenaw County by Sean Nickerson from Manchester. Then there's Steve Collier's first buck, a Calhoun County 10-point with a 13.1/8-inch tine. Wow, Steve's a bow hunter from Albion. And with this Midland County 10-point, Matt Johnson from Freeland has quite a tale to tell.
I use a grunt call, and I grunted my first session. About 15 minutes later, I humped with a release. My release fell off the string down on the ground. I climbed down out of the tree, got my release, climbed back up, sat for 10 minutes, heard something behind me, turned around and looked. All I could see was one horn. He walked out into the middle of the soybean field, and I shot through about an 18-inch opening in the trees. And when I hit him, I didn't know it was this deer, the same one. When he went down, I had to hold on to the tree because I almost fell out.
Oh, he grunts in the buck and squeaks out the shot. Reason enough to make Matthew Johnson, our Michigan Outdoors rompin', stompin', gruntin' callin' big buck hunter of the week. This year, we opened duck season in the Upper Peninsula, Drummond Island's Pottaganissing Bay. This estate land, a state marsh, open to the public. We spent our evenings at the Domino's Lodge, the guest of Don Volchak, a vice president of Domino's, who loves to hunt, especially hunt ducks. Don's wife is a Southern girl. Her name is Valeria. Everybody calls her V. And talk about a good sport. V seems to be at home in the marsh, well, as much as any human being can be.
Now, you've hunted for how long?
About 6 years.
Is that since meeting Don?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Don taught me to duck hunt. I had never duck hunted before.
Do you hunt other things than ducks? Or?
Well, I've only gotten one deer, but I grouse hunt with him. And I don't fish too much with him because I get seasick.
Well, why is it that you picked up these handy hunting sports?
Well, I'd never see my husband if I didn't. I didn't want to be a hunting widow, and I like the outdoors, and so I said, well, teach me. So other than getting up at 4 a.m. in the morning, that's the only really bad part.
That's rough for anybody. Well, before you met him, did you have any interest at all in hunting?
I'd shot guns and things. My grandma, I had a farm, and I would go up there and stay with her in the summers, and I would go out with the guys, but not anything like this.
Mm-hmm. Did your dad hunt?
Nope.
Well,
Grandpa did. My grandpa did, but not my dad.
That's kind of unusual. Now, what did the other women that were your friends and people you worked with say when you started getting into hunting?
They think I'm crazy.
So what do you say to them?
They go, "You kill ducks?" I say, "Yeah, it doesn't bother me. We eat everything we shoot, so."
Mm-hmm.
I think it's pretty fun. I think it's pretty hard. I think the ducks personally have an advantage. I miss a lot more than I hit.
Take them,
Take 'em. Fetch it up, fetch it up, fetch it up.
All right. Successful.
Girl, Peach, fetch it up.
V proved to be a good shot, every bit as good as me. But Don had promised V that by noon we'd take a break and head back to the lodge.
You're a real straightforward woman. We can talk about the closing of this trip right here. The little discussion you had with your husband.
I always want to go in before he does. And he always starts making excuses. And he can drag it out at least an hour every time by making excuses. And So in the end, I end up just either going and getting the boat and threatening to leave him, or start picking up the decoys myself, and he can't hunt anymore because there's nothing out there to decoy.
But this is
I hit him with a weed or
But
something.
this is a recurring problem.
Oh, every time. He would stay out here from daybreak till the sun went down.
Oh, Don's a diehard duck hunter, and when he hunts from daylight until dark. According to Jerry Martz, the DNR waterfowl specialist, dawn to dark hunting may be more common this season.
It appears that success was down a bit this year. I would say perhaps on the order of 20% or so on the larger managed areas and some of the larger marshes that we check. And it appears that a couple of things have happened. We had reports before the season that the duck numbers were really quite good. People were rather optimistic. And on some of the places like Maple River and Shiawassee, we had some sudden rains of rather extensive amount just before the season. Apparently it spread some of the birds out. Same was true over at Muskegon. And the results, particularly in wood ducks, were down a little bit more compared to what we had expected. So all in all, it appears that hunter numbers were about the same as last year, but the results on a per hunter basis were probably about 20% less than last year.
So you'd say partly due to the weather and partly due to more water around just spreading the ducks out?
Right. As you know, the weather was mild last year and this year for the opener, so the weather may not have been the major influence.
Well, that makes me feel better than that's what happened up on Drummond Island.
And you see some of those hunters were 1 year older, so they don't shoot as well, you see.
Well, I don't know about that, but I do know a lot of the locals up on Drummond Island said that the high water, much higher than last year, seemed to spread the ducks out.
Yes, because like I say, the numbers, just talking with our field personnel and other hunters, the numbers of ducks appeared to be very good, and there were high expectations.
What about the non-managed areas, the potholes, the private lands, farm country?
They exhibited the same, it varied from place to place, but it exhibited about the same outcome. It appears that success was down this year. I know some of the local people I talked to in the Bath-Langsburg area didn't have as good a success as last year, and that was true of some other places as well.
Oh, that's bad news.
That is bad.
You hit me
That's
right where I
close to
live.
home, right?
Yeah, you hit me right where I live and breathe. I was planning on getting out there this week.
Well,
I have to work for the ducks then.
That's right, and that's never really bad.
Now tell me about, just briefly about goose season.
Well, the goose season has been a little bit of a disappointment so far this year. The weather this fall has been very mild, as you know, and it does not appear as if geese have been migrating in the numbers that we experienced last year early in the season. Just as an example, I would say in the Shiawassee and Fish Point management zones, the harvest is down about a third to almost a half compared to last year. Of course, part of that is due to the one-bird bag limit. We're concerned about the poor production in the Tennessee Valley population. And at Fish Point right now, we have under 1,000 birds, and normally we'd have 3,000 to 4,000 present. So that may reflect some of this poor production.
This is the last week of the season. How is that going to stack up?
I would say be very good. Last week of the season in the northern part of the state will be during the first week of November, and it's a period of very active migration, both of divers and puddlers. The last part of October, first part of November is usually very, very good.
Super. Thanks for the good news at the end here.
Okay, Fred. I'll be out there along with you and the other hunters.
Terrific.
Don and V. Volchek put on a wild game dinner for us on Saturday night at the lodge, and they featured Swiss goose, which was a recipe that Don got off of our show. Well, Don, get ready for this one. Here's another goose breast recipe that you could also try with duck.
We received a recipe from Glynis Price on goose breast and port wine sauce.
Yeah, well, this is one of her husband's favorite dishes. I met Glynis a couple months ago. Proud as punch over this.
She should be. And she uses a Hunter Knorr sauce. It's actually like one of the packaged sauces, and it is hard to find. You just have to keep looking in the stores and you can find it. Then you pour port wine into it, and then a little bit of sour cream, and it actually makes more like a stroganoff tasting base to it. And then just let that cook down. And then there's your goose breast, of course.
Yeah, it
It's-
makes sense to have sort of a stroganoff type of dish because goose is an awful lot like venison. It looks like venison, and if it isn't cooked too long, it
Right.
has the texture. That fat, removing the fat, I find that isn't quite as necessary on waterfowl.
Right, it
kinda-
isn't on
it's
this.
kinda tasty,
It's
actually.
not as strong as it is on the venison and everything. And this whole recipe goes into a cooking bag like you use for turkey at Thanksgiving time, which really makes it nice. The sauce just goes into it, and then you're going to add fresh mushrooms to it.
Oh, that should make it tender and moist.
Right, it does. It keeps all the moisture right in, and it doesn't dry out at all.
Well, mushrooms have a lot of moisture too.
Right,
so
and it
this
will
be.
come out during the cooking. And then you want to squeeze as much air out as you can, and then of course you want to vent the bag because it can blow up and just make a mess out of the oven.
Mm-hmm.
And then it cooks at a very slow temperature in the oven for about 45 minutes to an hour.
You know, goose can be kind of difficult to cook because it does tend to get dry.
Very fast.
You are preparing this recipe, Kathy, for Mike Kesselut, a judge in our wild game cooking contest. He's executive chef at the Masters Restaurant in Madison Heights. I wonder how he's going to like it.
I think Kathy did a good job with this one. Breast is real tender. The port wine, I think is a little bit heavy on the port wine, but with the sour cream, it almost gives it a stroganoff type flavor.
Yeah.
And with the,
That's what it is.
If
with
it
the
just a little
goose,
bit
it just
thicker, yeah. Yep.
it's other than that, it's very good. And you know, you could do this with a lot of different things. Yeah, I would recommend maybe a little milder, little burgundy wine possibly.
Rather than the port.
Rather than the port. But other than that, the breast, I just can't believe how tender it is. It's real good.
Stroganoff, that is what it's like.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
We use the breast here. If you have the legs, you could boil that out and get the stock from the goose and make a soup out of that and use make a sauce with the rest of it for the breast. So
You know, the big news is that we sat here talking
100%
about how to improve the
utilization.
sauce. The goose is fine, right?
the goose is great. You know.
Bow hunters are excited. Pheasant hunters are excited. I hope you're excited to get outdoors this weekend. It's a great place to be. See you next week.
There's a rooster. No, dead bird.
That was not my bird.
No. Nice shoot, Fred.
If it wasn't for you, Dan,
Dead bird.
we'd never rooster
Good
down
girl,
on
Mom.
this one.
Good girl. Look, come. Look, come. Look. Good girl.
Next week on Michigan Outdoors, we'll look into those ads on the soap that's supposed to eliminate ultraviolet from deer hunters' clothes. Is there really more there than meets the eye? I don't think so, and I'll explain why next week. We'll talk about vision outdoors, and of course, we'll bring you a hopefully successful opening of pheasant season, a super pheasant Devon recipe, and a lot more. That's next week, right here on Public TV.